They called it a dying world. He called it Tuesday. The fire came down from the sky. That was the first thing. Not the sound, though the sound was everything, a cathedral organ bass note that pressed against the chest like a hand. But the light. The way the Keth drop bombardment turned the upper atmosphere into a second sunrise, pink and violent and wrong, the kind of color that had no business existing at 3 in the morning over the Laramie mountain range. Cade Graves stood on the jump platform of the MC-9 Firebird and watched it happen and did not look away. Around him, 7 other smoke jumpers were checking lines, tightening harnesses, doing the small, quiet rituals men and women do when they are about to jump into something they might not jump back out of. Nobody talked. The Keth didn't need to talk either. They just kept dropping fire. 30 seconds, said Rin Perch over the comm. She was the jump master tonight, 42 years old, hands like worn leather, voice like someone who had decided a long time ago that fear was a bureaucratic inefficiency she didn't have time for. Winds at 14 from the northeast. Drop zone is a half-click east of the Carver settlement. 200 civilians confirmed trapped. Let's go get them. Cade pulled his face shield down. Through the polycarbonate he could see the valley below, a patchwork of burning scrub and the pale swell squares of prefab shelters, and beyond them the advancing wall of Keth fire, which was not quite like any fire the earth had produced naturally. It burned hotter. It burned in colors, copper and violet, that natural combustion couldn't achieve. It burned through stone. 17 months into the Keth occupation of Earth's northern territories, and the science teams still didn't fully understand the chemistry of it. Only that water slowed it, and that conventional fire retardants were roughly as useful as good intentions. Graves, said Rin, your anchor. Keep the line together. Copy. He jumped. The air hit him like something solid. 200 meters of freefall in full gear, the burning valley expanding beneath him, and Cade felt, as he always felt in those first unmoored seconds, absolutely, perfectly calm. This was the thing about smoke jumpers that civilians never understood, and that no psych evaluation had ever managed to adequately document. The job selected for a specific kind of person, not reckless, not numb, something more precise. A person who, when confronted with catastrophic, life-ending danger, simply downshifted into a very clean, very quiet register and started solving problems. His chute deployed, the jerk and billow, the valley rising slow. Below him, the Carver settlement was already half-gun. 3 structures burning, 1 collapsed. The Keth bombardment had moved east. The dropships had a pattern, a 3-hour cycle of saturation before withdrawing to recharge their atmospheric dispersal units, which the ground teams had started calling breath mints, in the mordant way that people under constant mortal threat develop a mordant sense of humor. That gave Cade's team maybe 90 minutes before the next wave. 90 minutes to find 200 people. Get them to the evac corridor and be gone. He landed hard in a clearing of scorched grass, rolled. Came up already moving, chute lines already cut, pack already open. Around him the others were coming down. Yolanda Marak, 28, fastest hands on any jump team in the Wyoming region. Pete Callister, 34, structural assessment specialist, could read a burning building the way a doctor read an x-ray. Cowboy Stetler, who wore an actual battered Stetson hat under his jump helmet and had never once explained why and never would. Monica Tresh, who had a daughter back in Cheyenne and who Cade tried not to think about because thinking about what Monica had at stake made him want to do her job for her, and she was better at her job than he was. Andy 3 First, who had been Crow Nation fire crew before the occupation and who knew the mountain geography like the inside of his own chest. And finally Decker, the new kid, 19, still with the wide-eyed quality of someone who had not yet fully accepted the reality of his situation. All down, Monica confirmed. No injuries. Callister, you've got the western cluster, Cade said. Yo, Andy, you're with me on the main shelter building. Cowboy, take Decker and pull anyone you find in the eastern prefabs. Rin's overhead. She'll give us the Keth positioning. Keth dropships are holding at 80 kilometers north. Rin's voice in his ear. You've got the window. They moved. The Carver settlement had been a farming collective 8 months ago. 60 families, hydroponic arrays, a small school. Now it was a grid of smoke and heat, and the specific terrible silence that settlements took on after the first bombardment wave passed through. Cade moved through it at a run, hand over his nose and mouth out of habit rather than necessity. His respirator handled the particulates, cataloging and assessing. Roof collapse on Building 4, structural fire in the community hall. The hydroponic tower had fallen and was burning from the inside, a column of copper Keth fire climbing it like something alive. he found the first survivors in the irrigation ditch. 23 people, including 8 children, who had apparently been warned by someone and had done exactly the right thing. Get low, get wet, stay put. A woman in her 40s was the apparent organizer. A broad-shouldered farmer named Cassidy who was holding a compress against a teenage boy's arm and cataloging her own people with the flat-eyed efficiency of someone who had accepted terrible things and was now simply dealing with them. "You the smoke jumpers," she said. "That's us. We've got 3 people unaccounted for in Building 7. The Metal family, mother, father, little girl." Cade was already looking at Building 7. 2-story prefab, east wall fully involved, roof sagging on the left side. Survivable? Maybe. Probably. He ran the numbers the way Rin had taught him. Entry points, structural load, the math of fire. And arrived at an answer that was not entirely comfortable, but was not no. "Get your people moving toward the eastern corridor," he told Cassidy. "Andy's going to guide you. I'll get the medils." He didn't wait for a response. He was already running. Building 7's front door was locked, the lock mechanism fused by heat, and Cade put his shoulder through the adjacent window frame without breaking stride. Inside, smoke thick enough to cut, the particular darkness of a burning building at night, and beneath the roaring overhead, a sound. Small, human, a child crying. He followed the sound up a half-sapped staircase, one hand testing each step before committing weight. The second floor was intact on the eastern half, compromised on the west, and the fire was moving east. He had perhaps 4 minutes before the structural situation became academic. The Meadills were in the bedroom at the end of the hall. Father unconscious on the floor, concussion from a falling beam, Cade assessed, probably not fatal, not yet. Mother crouched over him, daughter pressed into the corner behind her. The girl maybe 7 years old, clutching something to her chest. It took Cade a second to understand what it was. A small wire cage with a latch, and inside the cage 2 birds, small and brown and alive. "There was a nest outside," the girl said, as if this explained everything. "I couldn't leave them." Cade looked at the birds, looked at the girl. The building shifted, a sound like the whole structure clearing for its throat, and dust came down from the ceiling. "Bring them," he said. He got the father over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. He took the girl's free hand. The mother went ahead, and Cade talked them through the hallway. "Step here, not there, duck, move in the staircase. Don't look at the fire, look at my feet. Put your feet where I put mine." And out through the shattered window frame just as the second floor gave way behind them in a cascade of timber and copper flame. Outside, 30 meters of open ground between them and the tree line. Cade was running with a 200-pound man on his shoulder and a small girl attached to his left hand. And the girl was running too. Running like she was angry at the ground, the cage swinging from her other hand. And the birds inside it were not making any sound at all, but they were alive. They made the tree line. Cade set the father down, and Cassidy appeared from somewhere with 2 others who took the weight, and the mother went to pieces in the best possible way, and the girl stood there with her cage and watched the building fold in on itself 60 meters behind them and said nothing. "Good job," Cade told her. She looked at him. "Are those yours?" she said, pointing at the sky. He looked up. Through the smoke and the residual copper-violet glow, there were lights moving. He knew the movement pattern. Keth reconnaissance drones, the small ones called flies by the ground teams, which was not accurate since flies didn't eat. "No," he said. "Those are not ours. Time to move." That was the night that started it. Later, much later, when there was a later to speak of, people who studied the Keth occupation would debate when the tide had actually begun to turn, and they would point to different moments. The Cascade Bridgehead, the atmospheric recapture at Duluth, the coordinated strike on the Keth orbital platform that people called the shot heard round the thermosphere. But Cade, who was not a historian and had no interest in becoming one, would say privately that it had started in a burning building in the Wyoming mountains, with a 7-year-old who wouldn't leave her birds behind. Though he was aware that this was not a useful thing to say to a historian. The Keth had been on Earth for a year and 9 months when Rin Perch was grounded. It happened in the way these things happen. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, but with paperwork and a medical evaluation and a conversation in the evac base operations center that lasted 20 minutes and left Rin with a compressed vertebra in her L4 that had given her enough leeway to keep jumping for 6 months longer than she should have. She didn't argue. She folded the medical forms in half and put them in her breast pocket, and then she sat on the equipment crates outside the ops center and smoked one of the thin hand-rolled cigarettes. She kept in a tin that had a picture of mountains on the lid from before, and she looked at the sky. Cade sat next to her. He didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that Rin didn't already know better than he did. After a while, she said, "You're taking lead. I know. You're going to hate it." "I know that too," she smoked. The sky over the mountains had the usual sickly copper tinge that the Keth atmospheric processors gave it. One of the theories was that they were slowly reshaping the atmospheric chemistry to suit their own biology. Though the science team had been careful not to confirm this in any official bulletin, because the psychological impact of confirmed atmospheric terraforming was a thing the regional command did not want to manage right now. "You know what they don't understand about us," Rin said. "The Keth. No, they fight like a machine, coordinated, efficient. The same patterns every time, refined, optimized, no waste." She took a long drag. "They've never seen anything that improvises. They've never fought anything that makes us up as it goes." Katie thought about this. That's not an advantage. That's just being disorganized. Rin looked at him, and her face did the thing it sometimes did, the thing he thought of as the face of someone who knows something you don't, but is kind about it. Disorganized is when you don't know what you're doing. Improvising is when you know exactly what you're doing. You just don't know yet what it is. She stubbed the cigarette out against the side of her boot. "You'll figure it out." She handed him the leadership of Jump Team 7 and went to work in the planning room, where she proceeded to become considerably more dangerous than she had ever been in the field. 3 months after Rin's grounding, the prison break happened. It was not technically a prison. It was a Keth detention facility, a prefab compound in the foothills of the Beartooth Mountains where the Keth held human prisoners whose function Cade had never been fully briefed on, because regional command operated on a need-to-know basis, and jump teams were not generally considered to need to know geopolitical intelligence. What he knew was what Rin told him. The facility held approximately 200 humans. It was lightly guarded by Keth standards because the Keth considered human escape attempts a statistical irrelevance. And 3 days ago, a small group of prisoners had proved the Keth's statistics wrong. The group was led, according to the intelligence reports, by a man named Randall Shea. Cade knew the name. Everyone in the mountain region knew the name. Shea had been, before the occupation, one of the most effective criminal operators in the Northern Territories, a methodical, patient man who had spent 4 years accumulating materials stolen from Keth salvage operations, hiding it somewhere in the Beartooth Range, and who had then been captured by a Keth sweep and interned while his cache sat untouched. The occupation had, if anything, been good for Shea, in the way that large-scale catastrophes are sometimes good for very particular kinds of people. It had cleared away the law enforcement infrastructure that had been closing in on him. It had made everyone too busy to care much about pre-occupation criminals, and it had given him a cover story that was almost believably sympathetic. Shea had escaped with 6 others. He had done it, the intelligence report noted with a certain reluctant admiration, by exploiting the Keth's documented blind spot for human variation in facial structure. The Keth had excellent visual acuity but processed human faces according to a pattern recognition system calibrated for their own species, which meant that sufficiently disguised humans were effectively invisible to their surveillance grid. Shea had acquired disguise materials inside the facility, had altered the appearance of himself and his men, and had walked out during a shift change. "He's going for the cache," Rin said, spreading the map on the planning table. "Beartooth foothills, here or here. Whatever he collected from the Keth salvage operations, it's worth enough to him to break out for. How many people does he have? 6 with him. But his lawyer, a man named Torin, who apparently remained free throughout the occupation by being spectacularly useful to the Keth, set a secondary fire in Sector 4 to cover the escape. The fire is spreading." Cade looked at the map. Sector 4 was wilderness, largely unpopulated, but there were 3 settlements within the fire's projected path and a xenobiology research station at grid reference. "Who's at the research station?" he said. 2 scientists. "One's been evacuated. The other one," Rin checked her notes, Dr. Jen Ayara, xenobiologist. "She was in the field when the fire started and hasn't responded to evac signals." "She's out there. She's out there." Cade looked at the ceiling. Sector 4 was also, incidentally, the region where the 2 separate Keth fire sources, the bombardment residue from 3 weeks ago and the new arsonist's fire, were projected to converge within approximately 18 hours. When 2 Keth fire fronts merged, the resultant atmospheric oxygen depletion was not metaphorical. It was literal. The combined chemical reaction consumed available O2 in a radius of approximately 2 kilometers in under 4 minutes. It was called a firestorm. The word predated the Keth, but they had given it new meaning. "We're going in," Cade said. Rin nodded. She had already known he was going to say that. Jump Team 7 went in at dawn, dropping into the eastern edge of Sector 4 ahead of the fire line, with a 2-vehicle ground element that would work the settlement evacuations while the jump team handled the complex terrain. The fire was not yet visible from their drop zone, but it was present in the air as a taste and a quality of light. That particular brassy, thick quality that Keth fire gave to the atmosphere, like breathing air that had been in a room with something large and chemical. They were 20 minutes in when Cowboy found the track. "Boots," he said, crouching over the mark in the ash-dusted ground. 6 sets, moving northeast. "Shay," said Andy, "or hikers with terrible timing." Cade looked northeast. The fire was northeast. The Beartooth cache was northeast. "It's Shay," he said, "which means Dr. Ayara is probably northeast too." "Yo, what's her last known?" Yolanda checked her wrist display. Xenobiology survey grid about 4 kilometers in. She was tracking a Keth atmospheric processing drone's secondary behavior patterns. She was watching what the Keth were doing. She does that for a living. Cade filed this away. A scientist who studied Keth behavior in the field, alone in a fire zone, presumably carrying whatever data she'd collected. That was a thing to think about. "We split," he said. "Callister, you and Monica push west to the Harmon settlement. Get those families out. Cowboy, you're with me and Andy on Ayara's track. Decker, you stay with the ground element." Decker opened his mouth. "Non-negotiable," Cade said. Decker closed his mouth. They found Dr. Jen Ayara in a ravine 4 kilometers northeast, and she was not, as Cade had half expected, a person in distress. She was a small woman, mid-30s, dark hair cut short, currently crouched behind an outcropping of basalt with what appeared to be a Keth-pattern chemical sensor. Repurposed, Cade's eye told him, from a salvaged drone component pressed to the ground, watching something in the ravine below with an expression of intense scientific concentration. The something was Randall Shay's people. There were 7 of them now. Shay had picked up an 8th, a man in civilian clothes who was clearly Torin, the lawyer, and they were moving through the ravine in good tactical order, which Cade noted because good tactical order was not how civilians moved. 3 of the 7 had the kind of loose, economical stride that meant prior military or prior law enforcement or prior something that had involved being shot at with some regularity. Dr. Ayara heard Cade's team before she saw them. She half-turned with a speed that suggested the reflex was older than her current profession, and then settled when she identified the jump team harnesses. "Smoke jumpers," she said quietly. "Yes, Dr. Ayara, we need to move." In a minute, she turned back to the ravine. "Shay's group took the East Fork 7 minutes ago. They're going to reach the cache site in about 40 minutes, which puts them directly in the path of the fire convergence." She paused. "Which you probably already knew." "We did," said Cowboy. "What I know that you probably don't," she said, "is that the cache he's going after isn't what he thinks it is." Cade crouched beside her. "Explain." She turned to look at him, and he saw in her eyes the expression of someone who had spent a long time with a piece of knowledge they weren't sure how to convey without sounding insane. "I've been studying the secondary behavior patterns of Keth atmospheric processors for 8 months," she said. "The official position is that the processors are strictly atmospheric. They're reshaping the air to suit the Keth's biology. That's the position. The position is incomplete. The secondary behavior patterns I've been documenting." She held up the sensor device. "The processors are also functioning as a network, a data network. The signals propagate through the atmospheric chemistry itself. And 4 years ago, someone retrieved a significant data package from that network and stored it physically, offline, in the Beartooth foothills." Cade looked at her. "Shay's cache isn't salvage material. Shay's cache is Keth navigational and tactical data. He doesn't know what he has. He thinks it's hardware, equipment he could trade. It's not. It's compressed data on a medium he wouldn't recognize as a storage device." She paused. "It's also the most complete single picture of Keth tactical coordination that any human agency currently possesses." The ravine below them was empty now. Shay's people had moved. "We need to get it before they do," Cade said. "Yes," she stood, brushing ash from her knees. "Also before the firestorm does." She fell in beside him like she'd been on jump teams her whole life, which she hadn't, but she'd been a Marine before she was a scientist. And there are certain ways of moving through uncertain terrain that the body does not forget. They moved. Shay's people had a 40-minute lead and ground knowledge of the terrain. Shay had apparently memorized the geography of the Beartooth foothills in extraordinary detail, which was the mark of either excellent preparation or profound obsession, and possibly both. Cade's team moved faster, cutting across the ravine floor while Shay's group followed the longer ridge route, and they were perhaps 15 minutes behind when the situation changed. The change arrived in the form of a sound, a specific, wet, concussive sound that Katie had learned to identify over 17 months of firework, and then the fire crested the eastern ridge. Not a wall, not yet. A vanguard, fingers of copper violet reaching through the tree line, moving faster than natural fire moved because Keth fire accelerated in proportion to available fuel, and the Beartooth foothills were old growth, forest. Cade watched it for 3 seconds, the precise amount of time required to convert what he was seeing into a tactical picture, and then said, very quietly, "Okay," said Cowboy, "the east route's gone. We go north, along the creek bed. The fire won't cross running water for at least another hour. The creek runs cold and the Keth fire needs ground contact to gain traction. That puts us on the same route as Shay. Yes, I know what it is." They moved north. They were in the creek bed, boots in cold water, the fire visible now on both sides of the valley like curtains being drawn, when they heard the shot. Single, flat, without echo, a human weapon, not a Keth energy discharge, which had a distinctive harmonic signature. Somewhere ahead of them in the smoke and the gathering orange-copper light, someone in Shay's group had shot someone else in Shay's group. "He's cleaning house," said Andy. Cade had read the intelligence report carefully. Shay's escape group had been selected with functional roles in mind. A mapper, a structural specialist, a pilot, roles useful for reaching the cache and extracting it. Once those roles had been fulfilled, the logic of the situation changed. "He's going for the cache alone," Cade said. "Which means he'll take the woman," said Andy. "Leverage. Anyone comes for the cache. He's got a body to negotiate with." They heard the woman before they saw her, not screaming, which surprised Cade, but the particular controlled quiet of someone in a situation they have assessed and are enduring and are watching for the precise moment to stop. Enduring. Dr. Jen Ayara, he reminded himself, had been a Marine. Marines were trained to endure and to wait and to act at the correct moment with as much violence as the situation required. They came over a rise and found them at the cache site. The cache site was a shallow cave in a basalt formation, barely large enough for 3 people, and the entrance was partially blocked by what appeared to be. Cade's eye cataloged it without permission, a Keth atmospheric processing module, approximately the size of a large suitcase, matte black and completely featureless except for a faint bioluminescent seam along one edge. Whatever it was not hardware. It did not look like hardware. It looked like a living thing that had learned to be very still. Randall Shay was perhaps 45 years old, with the particular physical economy of someone who had been in confined spaces for a long time and had kept himself sharp in spite of it. He was holding Dr. Ayara with one hand, her wrist twisted behind her back, in a way that was efficient and professional, and communicated clearly that he knew what he was doing. He had a weapon in his other hand. He looked at Katie's team with the flat appraisal of a man who had been calculating angles his whole life. "Smoke jumpers," he said. "You jumped into this. It's what we do," Cade said. "Walk away. I've got no quarrel with you. I've got what I came for. 10 minutes and I'm out of your sector." "There's no out of the sector," Cade said. 2 fire fronts converging in about 40 minutes. You walk north, you walk into the eastern front. You walk east, you walk into... I know about the fires. Shay's voice was patient. "I've got an extraction vehicle 2 kilometers north, built for Keth fire conditions." Cade looked at Dr. Ayara. She looked back at him. Her eyes were doing the calculation he was doing. The distance, the angle, Shay's grip, the weapon, the terrain behind Shay where the cave entrance was, and behind the cave entrance the Keth data module sitting in the dark like a sleeping animal. "That module," Cade said, shifting his gaze to the cave, "is Keth property." Shay's expression flickered. "It's in a hole in the ground in the Wyoming mountains. It belongs to whoever's holding it. It's the most complete tactical picture of Keth coordination that any human agency possesses," Cade said, repeating Dr. Ayara's words. He watched Shay's face and saw the information land, not new information. He understood in that moment, but information that Shay had not expected him to have. "You know what you pause." Long. The firelight shifted on the basalt walls. "I know what it's worth," Shay said. "There are people who will pay extraordinary amounts for it. People who want to understand the Keth. People who want to fight them." He tilted his head slightly. You're fighting them. Wouldn't you like to understand them better? Not enough to get it from you. Then we're at a standoff. We're not at a standoff, Cade said. We're at a fire front. In about 37 minutes, the oxygen in this valley is going to go away. There's only one way out of here, and it goes through me. Something shifted in Shay's posture. A micron of adjustment, barely visible. But Cade had been trained to read fire behavior, which meant reading the small movements that preceded large ones. And this was that. Shay was going to move. Shay was going to move, and it was going to happen fast, and it was going to happen. Dr. Jen Ayara broke his grip. She broke it the way a trained person breaks a wrist lock, not by pulling but by rotating, creating the one angle from which the grip could not hold. And she was already stepping away and already low when Shay's weapon came up. And Cade was already moving, had been moving from the moment he saw the micron shift, and the distance between them was 15 meters. And he had in his hand the jump axe he carried on his left hip, and he had used it for firework for 11 years, and he threw it. The axe turned twice in the air. The firelight caught it. It took Shay in the shoulder, not the chest, not a kill throw, not a kill that Kay had intended. And Shay went back and down, and his weapon discharged once into the basalt above the cave entrance, and rock dust came down. Shay was up faster than a man with an axe in his shoulder had any right to be. He was running north toward his extraction vehicle, and Cade let him run for the moment because there were other priorities. You all right? He said to Dr. Ayara. Fine. She was already at the cave entrance, hands on the module. This weighs about 40 kilos. I can carry it if someone takes my gear. Andy, Cade said. Already on it, Andy said. They moved the module out of the cave. It was, as Dr. Ayara had said, approximately 40 kilos, and it was also warm in a way that had nothing to do with the ambient fire temperature. A low living warmth that made Cade's hands feel strange. He handed it to Andy, who strapped it to the improvised carry harness with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a man who had carried stranger things through worse terrain. Cowboy was on the comm. Rin, we've got the target. We've also got a fire convergence issue. Rin's voice, steady as concrete. How long? 30, maybe 25. The creek runs to a lake 2 kilometers south. Granite outcropping on the north shore, 40 meters above waterline. Get there. That's into the fire. It's also the only high ground outside the oxygen depletion radius. You want the math or you want to move? We want to move, Cade said. They moved south. The fire was ahead of them, and above them, and behind them, and the air was beginning to taste the way Rin had once described to him. Not smoke, not heat, but thin. The way very high altitude tasted, the first physiological signal that the atmospheric oxygen was being consumed. Cade's body knew what this meant before his mind processed it, and his body's recommendation was to run, which he did, and they all did, and the module bounced on Andy's back, and the creek water soaked through their boots, and the copper-violet light was everywhere now. Not from a single source but diffuse, ambient, as though the fire had become the atmosphere itself. They found Shay at the lake. He had reached his extraction vehicle, a reinforced ground crawler, 6-wheeled, the kind of civilian unit that had been retrofitted with Keth fire shielding. And he had also found that the fire had beaten him to the northern shore, and the vehicle was burning from the undercarriage. He was standing by the burning crawler with the axe still in his shoulder, and his face had the expression of a man who has had the mathematical certainty of his situation explained to him by events. Your vehicle's gone, Cade said. I can see that. Come with us. Shay looked at him. There was a long moment, and in the long moment the firelight did extraordinary things to the landscape. Copper and violet and the deep red of the natural forest catching from the Keth fire spread. All of it reflected in the lake's surface so that the water looked like something from a mythological painting. All that burning beauty that had nothing to do with beauty. Cade watched it in his peripheral vision and waited. The module, Shay said. It goes with me. The module goes to the regional command, Cade said. That's not negotiable. Without me, none of you know what it is. I spent 4 years identifying it and acquiring it. Dr. Ayara knows what it is. A pause. Shay looked at Dr. Ayara, and she looked back at him with the expression of someone who is not in the business of hating the people they're looking at, but is also not prepared to pretend to any warmth that isn't there. 4 years, he said to her or to himself, it wasn't clear. Come with us, Cade said again. The fire crested the northern ridge. Not fingers now, the wall. The full convergence front, copper and violet and vast, and the sound of it was the cathedral organ again, the pressure note that found something in the human chest and pressed. It was enormous. It was indifferent. It did not care about the module or the cache or the occupation or any of the small human stories being conducted beneath it, and in its indifference it was more purely alien than the Keth had ever managed to be. Shay came with them. They had 12 minutes. Rin's granite outcropping was on the north shore, and they went south, around the lake, the fire closing from 3 sides and the lake on the 4th, and the math of it was brutal and precise. They needed height, they needed it to be rock, not organic material, and they needed to be above the 2-kilometer oxygen depletion radius before the convergence completed. The outcropping was 40 meters above the waterline. It was enough. Probably was a word that Cade had made a certain peace with over the course of his career. They went up the rock face in the dark and the heat, Cade leading with Andy directly behind with the module, Dr. Ayara behind him, Cowboy and Shay at the rear. Cowboy had removed the axe from Shay's shoulder with a precision that suggested either medical training or some other kind of experience with embedded metal, and had dressed the wound with the matter-of-factness of a man doing routine maintenance. And Shay had not made any sound during this process that Cade could identify as specifically pain. And the fire was behind them, and the rock was hot under their hands. At 30 meters, the air changed. It was a physical sensation, not a gradual one, the specific, unmistakable moment when available oxygen dropped below the threshold for comfortable breathing. Cade's lungs sent a message that his brain processed as, "This is different now," and he converted this into a mechanical instruction to breathe in, longer, slower cycles, and to keep moving. 35 meters, 38. The top of the outcropping was a flat shelf of granite approximately 15 meters across, with a natural windbreak on the south side where the rock folded. They came over the edge and Cade counted heads, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, himself and the module, and then he lay on his back on the warm granite and looked up. The sky was on fire. It was the most accurate description. The convergence had completed below them, 2 Keth fire fronts joining in the valley, and the resultant chemical reaction had sent a column of superheated atmosphere directly upward, and the column was catching the cloud base and spreading across the sky in all directions, so that the overcast above them was lit from within by copper and violet, an aurora made of combustion, spreading and shifting and immense. "Christ," said Cowboy softly. Cade thought about Rin. He thought about her face when she said improvise. He thought about the Medill girl in the burning building, holding the cage with her birds, running in the dark with her feet going wherever his feet went. The fire burned for 6 hours. They stayed on the rock. Shay's shoulder was dressed and he sat apart from the others, not sullen but alone the way a man is alone when he is doing an accounting of a certain kind. Dr. Ayara sat with her back against the windbreak and had a notebook out, a physical paper notebook, which was the kind of eccentricity that xenobiologists apparently cultivated, and was writing in it with a small light. Andy sat beside the module with his hand on it and said nothing for a long time, and then said to no one in particular, "The fire is the same color as their ships." Nobody answered, but everyone was thinking it. "It's not coincidental," Dr. Ayara said, without looking up from her notebook. "The atmospheric processors use the same chemical reaction as their propulsion systems. The fire is a byproduct. They're not weaponizing fire exactly." There she paused. "Breathing. They're breathing fire," Cowboy said, more or less. "Well," he said, "that's irritating." Cade looked at the module. The bioluminescent seam along its edge was more visible in the darkness, a faint, steady blue-green, nothing like the copper-violet of the Keth fire, a completely different light, patient and contained. He thought about what Dr. Ayara had said, navigational and tactical data, the most complete picture of Keth coordination that any human agency currently possessed. He thought about 17 months of Keth fire falling from the sky while jump teams went in to pull people out. He thought about Rin's compressed vertebra. He thought about Monica's daughter in Cheyenne. He thought about buildings folding in on themselves and old-growth forest burning in colors that had no right to exist. He thought about improvising. "Dr. Ayara," he said. She looked up. "When we get down from here," he said, "I want you to tell me everything you know about how the Keth atmospheric network actually works." She studied him for a moment. "That's a long conversation. I have time. Do you understand what I'm suggesting? That the atmospheric network is their communication system, their navigation grid, and possibly She paused, searching for the right word, their cognition substrate. They don't just use the atmosphere. They think through it. And the module has a blueprint of how it works. Yes. Then we have everything we need to understand it." He looked at the fire below them. "To understand it well enough to talk back." A silence. The fire shifted. The module's blue-green seam pulsed once, very faintly, like something breathing in sleep. "That's an extraordinary thing to say," Dr. Ayara said. "I jump into fires for a living." She looked at him. Something in her expression moved and settled. "I was going to say it's an extraordinary thing to say, and that I've been thinking the same thing for 8 months. She tapped her notebook. "I have the theoretical framework, I don't have the data." She glanced at the module. "Until now." They were rescued at dawn. The rescue came in the form of Rin Perch, who had apparently decided that her compressed vertebra was not an absolute veto on personal field presence and had commandeered an all-terrain vehicle from the regional command pool and driven it to the lake shore and up the south face of the granite outcropping to within shouting distance. She arrived, parked, got out, looked at the assembled group. 7 smoke jumpers, 1 xenobiologist, 1 captured criminal, 1 Keth data module of incalculable intelligence value, and said, "You took longer than I expected." "The fire was big," Katie'd said. "Fire's always big." She looked at the module. "That what I think it is, Doctor?" "Ayara thinks it might be the key to understanding how the Keth atmospheric network functions," Cade said. "As a communication and coordination system." "As a weapon," Rin said. "Yes." Rin looked at it for a long time. The morning light was coming in from the east, real light, yellow and clean, not the Keth copper violet. And it caught the module's seam, and the blue-green brightened briefly, as if acknowledging the sun. Rin put her hand on the module and held it there, and her face did not change, but her shoulders did something very small. "Load it up," she said. They loaded it up. Shay went into provisional custody. The module went into the cargo compartment of the ATV with Dr. Ayara riding beside it with her notebook, and the jump team piled in and sat on each other's gear and ate the ration bars from the emergency supply in the seat pockets. Cade sat in the front with Rin as she drove down the mountain. "The girl," Rin said, "the Carver kid with the birds." "Yeah." "Did they make it?" "Eggs hatched," he said. "She showed me before we extracted. 3 of them." Rin nodded, watching the track. "That's the thing about this," she said, "that they don't understand." "What is?" "That we carry things with us, even in a fire." She navigated around a rock. "They travel light, no attachment to the material, no sentiment." "No," she gestured, encompassing something imprecise. "They came here, and they started breathing, and they started burning, and they didn't account for the people who would run into the burning and carry things out. We're fireworkers. We're human." She looked at him briefly. "Same thing, maybe." He thought about that for the rest of the drive. The debriefing at Regional Command lasted 16 hours. It covered the cache recovery, Shay's capture, the fire convergence, the oxygen depletion event, and the module. Dr. Ayara was in a separate room for most of it, with the module and a team of analysts who came out at intervals, looking quietly stunned in the way that scientists look when data is exceeding their models. Cade gave his account 3 times to 3 different people, then sat in a corridor and ate a hot meal and didn't think about anything in particular. Rin found him there. She sat beside him and stole a portion of his food with the unceremonious ease of long familiarity and said, "The analysts think the module contains Keth tactical positioning data for the next 14 months. Projected operational planning for the Northern Territories, the atmospheric processor network layout, and..." She stopped. "And what?" "And something that the chief analyst is currently describing as what appears to be a complete acoustic map of the Keth communication frequencies, including those used for long-range coordination with their orbital platforms." Cade set down his fork. "Yes," said Rin. "We could talk to them. We could listen to them. First, then eventually." She shrugged, a careful, considered shrug. "Maybe. You said they'd never seen anything that improvises." "I said that. This is that," Cade said. "This is exactly that. They had a data module sitting in the mountains for 4 years. They didn't go get it because it didn't cross their tactical model that someone would go into a fire to retrieve it. They couldn't compute the person who would do that. The criminal who stole it in the first place. No. The scientist who spent 8 months watching the atmospheric network, and the smoke jumper who went into the fire on the chance that she had something worth having." Cade looked at his hands, which were still faintly ash-stained despite the shower, the residue of Keth fire not entirely willing to be washed away. They planned for rational behavior, for self-preservation. They planned for a species that would calculate costs and benefits and withdraw from the fire. And instead they got us, and instead they got us. Rin was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Shay's lawyer, Torin. He's been cooperative in custody. He says he coordinated with the Keth directly. that there are Keth human liaisons in the major population centers, who manage the occupation's administrative layer. We knew that. We knew it in general. Torn has names, locations, protocols. She paused. He also says that the Keth's current assessment of human military capacity includes the phrase, and he's translating from the Keth administrative language, so allow for imprecision, biological persistence without strategic coherence. Cade thought about this. They think we're stubborn but not smart. That's an approximate translation. He smiled. It was not a large smile, and it was not particularly warm, but it was real. Good, he said. Let them keep thinking that. The months that followed were not simple. Nothing about the Keth occupation was simple, and the module did not change the fundamental equation overnight. The Keth were still in the atmosphere, their processors were still burning, their ships were still in orbit, and people were still living in settlements and running from fire and losing things and carrying other things through the burning. But the module changed things. Dr. Ayara's analysis, conducted with the team of analysts over a period of 3 months in a hardened facility in Cheyenne, produced what the regional command cautiously designated a strategic asset of the First Order, which was the bureaucratic equivalent of saying that someone had handed them a window into the interior of the Keth tactical mind. The atmospheric network was, as Dr. Ayara had theorized, a cognition substrate, not individual thought but collective coordination. The Keth did not communicate in language, not exactly. They coordinated in chemistry. In the specific molecular interactions of the atmosphere they were gradually reshaping. The module documented those interactions in full. Understanding it was one thing, using it was another. Cade was not a scientist and did not pretend to be one, but he had spent his career in the fire, in the actual chemical reality of Keth atmospheric chemistry, breathing the margins of it, moving through it, learning its behavior the way you learn the behavior of any force that wants to kill you. And there was a thing he understood about it that the analysts, working in their hardened facility with their clean instruments and their models, did not quite grasp. He understood where it was weak. Natural fire had structural weaknesses, points where a line cut at the right angle could deprive it of fuel, where a controlled burn could remove the material the advancing front needed. Fire was not invincible. It was an appetite, and appetites could be frustrated. Keth fire was more complex, fed by chemistry rather than simple organic combustion, but the module's data showed clearly that the atmospheric network had nodes, coordination points where the chemical signal concentrated and propagated outward. If those nodes were disrupted, the coordination degraded. If the coordination degraded, the fire fronts became uncoordinated. Uncoordinated fire was something that human firefighters knew how to handle. He brought this to Rin. Then they brought it to the regional command. Then the regional command brought it to the national coordination body, and the national coordination body brought in the military science teams. And 6 months after the module was recovered, there was a plan. The plan was not elegant. Elegant plans were, in Cade's experience, plans that had been designed by people who hadn't been in the fire. The plan was practical. A coordinated disruption of 7 atmospheric network nodes, timed to coincide with a natural weather event, executed by teams on the ground who knew the terrain and the fire and who were, fundamentally, people who ran toward things that other people ran from. Jump teams, smoke jumpers, people who dropped into the heart of it. Cade's team went for Node 4. Node 4 was in the Beartooth Mountains, not coincidentally, and not far from the basalt formation where Shay's cache had sat for 4 years, and not far from the lake where they had waited on the granite outcropping while the firestorm burned below them. Cade had been back to the region several times since the cache recovery, and he knew the terrain with the intimacy of someone who had been afraid and had worked through the fear and come out the other side. They jumped at night. The atmospheric processors were running. The copper-violet glow was present in the clouds, but the weather event was also running. A cold front moving down from the north that the Keth processors were not designed to account for, because the Keth's atmospheric modeling did not include the Earth's native meteorological systems. The cold front was creating interference in the network, degrading coordination, and Dr. Ayara had calculated that the disruption window, the period during which the nodes could be reached and disabled with the chemical dispersal package she had developed, was approximately 90 minutes. 90 minutes, the length of a fire window, the length of a standard jump operation. Cade landed in a meadow of silver grass and dark firs, the cold front air clean and cold in his lungs, and stood for a moment simply breathing. Around him the team was gathering, checking in, moving with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this many times and knew that noise was a tax on attention. The copper-violet glow to the northwest was the node, a concentration point in the atmospheric network, rendered faintly visible by the chemical density, like a bruise in the sky. 2 kilometers, Andy said. Same terrain as the cache run, I know it. Then you're on point, Katie said. They moved. The 2 kilometers took 22 minutes. Katie tracked it on the internal clock he had developed. Over years of timed fire operations, through fir forest and across a meadow and up a rocky slope that had the particular quality of moonlit granite, cold and exact. The node was not a physical structure. That had been one of the revelations of Dr. Ayara's analysis. The atmospheric network nodes were locations, not objects, points in space where the chemistry was dense enough to propagate the coordination signal. Disrupting them required introducing the chemical dispersal package into a roughly 200-meter radius at a specific concentration. In practical terms, spray a canister of material into the air and walk through it. That's it, Cowboy had said when Dr. Ayara explained the delivery method. That's it, she had said. We're beating the alien occupation with a fire extinguisher. The fire extinguisher is built from a reverse-engineered Keth chemical protocol, using data they stored in a cave for 4 years. But yes, functionally. Cowboy had looked at the canister for a long moment. I respect that, he had said. At the node site, Cade took the canister from his pack. It was heavier than it looked, 30 kilos of Dr. Ayara's formulation, in a pressurized case with a mechanical release that operated independently of any electronic system, because electronic systems had a documented failure rate in heavy Keth atmospheric conditions, and Dr. Ayara had designed around it. He set it down in the center of the node site and set the timer for 12 minutes. Move out, he said. They moved. Behind them, at 12 minutes and 4 seconds, the canister discharged. A faint sound like a breath expelled, and the chemistry did what chemistry does, propagating outward through the air, and the copper-violet bruise in the sky above the node site dimmed and shifted and became, for the first time in 17 months of occupation, the ordinary dark. The reports from the other 6 teams came in over the following hour. Node 1 cleared, Node 2 cleared, Node 3. A complication with terrain, 2-minute delay cleared. Nodes 5, 6, and 7 cleared. 7 for 7. The atmospheric processors did not stop. They were not designed to stop. They were continuous systems, biological in a way that made switching off not a meaningful concept. But without the network coordination, without the node system that allowed them to function as a collective, they became what individual processors had always been. Local phenomena, bounded, not systemic. The sky over the Northern Territories was not clean that night, but it was not a single coordinated burning. It was 7 separate, uncoordinated local events. And 7 separate, uncoordinated local events were something that 300 smoke jumpers knew exactly what to do with. They worked through the night. All the jump teams, all 300, coordinated by Rin Perch's planning room in Cheyenne, running standard fireline operations against uncoordinated Keth atmospheric events the way they had been trained to run them. The way they had been running them for 17 months, getting better at it every time, accumulating the specific and granular knowledge of fire that the Keth did not have and had not thought to account for. By dawn, the Northern Territory fire events were contained, not extinguished. The processors were still running. The occupation was not over, but contained. Contained was a start. Cade sat on a hillside at dawn and watched the sky turn. The cold front had cleared most of the copper-violet tinge, and the blue was coming back. The ordinary blue, the blue that predated the Keth and would presumably outlast them. He was tired in the clean way that very hard physical work produced. Not depleted but emptied, the way a vessel is empty after it has been fully used. Rin's voice in the comm, all teams report. 7 nodes disrupted, Northern Territory events contained. Regional Command confirms the atmospheric network is in degraded coordination mode. Estimated recovery time for the Keth. A pause. The quality of a pause that meant Rin was holding something back. Estimated recovery time is 3 to 5 years. 3 to 5 years. Cowboy said, from somewhere to Cade's right. That's what the analysts say. What do we do with 3 to 5 years? Whatever we want, Rin said. Cade looked at the blue sky. It was cold and clear, and the quality of the light was different from what he had been looking at for 17 months. Different not because anything had changed structurally, but because his eye, which had been calibrated to the wrong thing for so long, was recalibrating. This was how eyes worked. They adjusted. They improvised. He heard a sound beside him and turned. Dr. Ayara had come up the hill and was sitting a few meters away, notebook open, writing something. She had been in the field for the node operation despite not being a smoke jumper, and despite Katie's pointed observation that she was not a smoke jumper, which she had addressed by saying that she had an active Marine Reserve Commission, and that if he had a concern about her field qualification he could take it up with the reserve command structure, which he had decided not to do. Writing it down, he said, always. She didn't look up. The morning after the node disruption, atmospheric readings, the specific quality of the light. She paused. I'm an observer. I observe. What do you observe? She looked up then at the sky, the blue sky with its ordinary quality, and her expression was the expression of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a thing and has, this morning, received confirmation that the waiting was worth it. That we won today, she said. Not the war. One engagement, one day. She looked back at her notebook. But the winning feels the way I thought it would feel. Small, like a door opening. She wrote something. I thought it might feel bigger. The big ones always feel small, Cade said. From the inside, she considered this. Is that experience talking? That's Rin talking through me. She smiled. It was a real smile, not performed for his benefit but genuine. The smile of someone who has been in the company of enough serious and competent people to recognize the lineage of a well-placed sentence. The calm crackled. Monica Tresh's voice, Cade, got a situation at the southern perimeter. Looks like a Keth reconnaissance unit, maybe 4 drones, probing the node site. They know something happened. How long to the site? 20 minutes, running. He was already standing. He looked at Dr. Ayara, who had closed her notebook and was looking at him with the expression of someone who had made a decision approximately 2 seconds ahead of his response. I'm coming, she said. You're an observer. I observe better when I'm there. He ran. She ran beside him. Behind them, on the hillside, the blue sky widened as the cold front continued to move south, and the light was clean and cold and ordinary, and the only copper in it was the rising sun. They handled the reconnaissance drones. It was a standard operation, a jammer, and a terrain configuration that broke the drone's line of sight with the node site and sent them on a false track north. And it took 40 minutes and involved no injuries and produced, afterward, a set of acoustic recordings of the drone's navigation signals that Dr. Ayara noted were consistent with the degraded coordination pattern and would be useful for modeling the recovery timeline. Walking back, Katie said, You really are always working. You really are always running towards something. That's the job. That's the character, she said. The job just provides the occasions. She adjusted the strap of her pack. What happens when the occasions stop? When the Keth are gone? Are they going? Eventually. Probably. She looked at the horizon. The atmospheric chemistry they're creating isn't stable long-term. The Earth's own weather systems will disrupt it, progressively. The network disruption accelerates that. In 3 to 5 years, their coordination is degraded to the point of strategic ineffectiveness. In 8 to 10 years, the atmosphere is functionally recovered. She paused. That's the long game. So we play the long game. We've been playing the long game. She looked at him. That's what the module was. That's what the birds were. The birds. The girl with the cage in the fire. You carried them out. She tilted her head slightly. That's not efficiency. That's not strategy. That's something else. That's the thing they didn't account for. He thought about the small sounds the birds had made, or hadn't made. He corrected himself. They had been silent in their cage while the building burned around them, and then he'd been running with the girl's hand in his, and the cage swinging and the birds alive inside it, and the building folding behind them. He thought about the girl saying, Are those yours? And pointing at the Keth drones in the sky, and the specific way a child asks a question that adults have decided not to ask. 3 hatched, he said, from the eggs she had, I know. You mentioned it to Rin. She smiled. She mentioned it to the planning team. It became not a motto exactly, a reference. When something survives that shouldn't have, they say it hatched. It hatched, meaning it made it. Against the odds, in the fire it made it. She looked at him sidelong. Your team hatched, the module hatched, last night hatched. He was quiet for a moment. That's Rin's doing. She files things away. Good things to file. They walked. The morning was opening around them, the cold front air clean, the mountains blue-gray in the distance, the fire smell present but not dominant, a trace, not a wall. Behind them, the node site was silent. Overhead, the sky was doing what the sky does when given the opportunity. Simply being itself, without copper, without violence, blue and cold and wide enough for anything. After, Cade said, When it's over, what do you do? Study them, she said. properly, when we have access. There's so much we don't know about their actual biology, the atmospheric cognition substrate. Whether it's distributed consciousness or something more like a shared navigation system, whether the fire is deliberate or incidental. She stopped herself. I'd talk about this for hours. I know. What do you do? He looked at the mountains. He thought about jumping, about the 3 seconds of free fall that were perfectly calm, about the quality of air at height, about the specific mathematics of fire behavior and the specific satisfaction of a well-cut line. He thought about Rin's hand on the module in the morning light, the thing her shoulders had done. Same thing, he said. Probably. She looked at him. You'd keep jumping into fires. Someone has to. There won't be Keth fires. There'll be fires, he said. There are always fires. She considered this for what felt like a genuine consideration. Not polite, but actual. Yes, she said. I suppose there are. They reached the team's assembly point and found the others already there. Cowboy sitting on a rock eating something. Yo running a maintenance check on her harness. Andy standing apart, looking at the mountains with the quality of attention that Andy brought to. Landscapes, Pete Callister sorting equipment with the systematic ease of long practice. They were dirty and tired, and the morning light found every line of fatigue in their faces, and they were, each of them, simply there, simply present, simply the thing that they were. Cade looked at them and thought about Rin's word. Improvise. Knowing exactly what you're doing before you know what it is. He thought, this is what humans do. We go into the fire. We carry things out. We don't always know what we're carrying until we're clear of the smoke and the thing we're holding is in the light and we can see it. Sometimes it's a child with birds. Sometimes it's a data module that holds the key to understanding the thing that's burning the world. Sometimes it's just another person, someone who needed a hand on a staircase in the dark. We don't plan for all of it. We plan for some of it and improvise the rest, and we're stubborn about both. He said to his team, good work. Let's find out what's next. And they found out. The 3 to 5 years were 3 years. The Keth withdrawal was not dramatic. It was a process, a slow recession, the atmospheric processors degrading, the fire events becoming local and manageable, the orbital platforms withdrawing in sequence. It was not a surrender in any form the Keth had a word for, or possibly any form they had a concept for. It was a recalculation, a strategic reallocation, the equivalent of what a very large and very certain entity does when it discovers that its certainty was wrong in a way it did not anticipate. They had not anticipated the people who run toward fires. In the end, the report that Dr. Jen Ayara filed with the International Xenobiology Council, a report that became one of the foundational documents of the new field of Keth, behavioral analysis, contained in its conclusions a paragraph that was quoted frequently afterward, sometimes by people who understood it, and sometimes by people who thought they understood it and had missed the main point. The paragraph read, "The Keth operate according to a model of sentient behavior in which efficiency and self-preservation are treated as near universal constants. Their strategic models are extraordinary in scope and sophistication, but they are calibrated for species that behave in accordance with these constants. What they encountered in humanity was a species that treats these constants as negotiable, not in all instances, and not in all individuals, but in sufficient numbers and with sufficient consistency that their models systematically failed to predict human behavior in precisely the circumstances, extreme danger, apparent futility, catastrophic environmental conditions where strategic behavior mattered most. They planned for a species that would calculate the cost of the fire and withdraw. They got a species that had already calculated the cost, found it unacceptable, and was running toward the fire anyway. The technical data recovered by the events in the Beartooth Mountains was significant. What it represented, a human going into a fire for something worth having, was more so. Cade read this once. 3 years after the Beartooth operation, sitting in the operations center of the Wyoming Regional Jump Command, which was no longer fighting Keth fire and was instead fighting ordinary fire, the kind that the Earth had always produced, which had not diminished during the occupation and had not diminished after it, because fire did not require alien intelligence to be fire. It was just fire. It was the thing that had always been there, and it would always be there, and people like Cade Graves would always go into it. He put the report down on Rin's desk, where she was sitting across from him with a mug of coffee and the expression of someone who had read it twice already and was waiting to see what he made of it. Good paragraph, he said. Good paragraph, she agreed. She missed the birds. Rin looked at him. She mentioned them in the body of the report. She should have put them in the conclusion. Rin considered this. She looked at the map on the wall. Updated now, the Keth processor locations replaced by ordinary fire risk indices, the copper-violet zones replaced by the familiar red-orange-yellow of standard fire weather, and she said, "Next time we'll do better." Outside, AMC-9 Firebird was running up its engines on the pad. Jump Team 7 was suiting up for an early season dispatch, a lightning strike fire in northern Beartooth Range, approximately 400 acres and moving northeast in a 20-kilometer wind. Ordinary fire, extraordinary terrain, 2 settlements in the projected path. Cade picked up his helmet. He could hear faintly the engine sound growing as the Firebird's rotors engaged. He could feel, in the particular way that the body remembers what it has done many times, the quality of the air at altitude before the jump, the specific cold and the specific emptiness and the 3 seconds of perfect clarity before chute deployed and the ground came up. He thought, this is what we are. This is the thing they couldn't account for. He walked out to the pad. Below the Beartooth Mountains, somewhere in a meadow of silver grass that had come back green after the fires, a bird that had hatched from an egg, carried through burning darkness by a 7-year-old girl, was sitting on a fence post and singing. It did not know that it was the conclusion to anything. It was just doing what it did in the world alive because someone had gone into the fire and carried it out. The Firebird lifted. Cade jumped.